Just want to welcome everyone this evening. Can everyone hear me okay on this? Okay, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Jeff Muller. I'm the gallery director here at Silvermine Arts Center. And I just want to say there's a lot of people here I don't know. It's great and welcome. And for those of you who don't know, want to know more about Silvermine, I just want to give you just a little bit about our history. So we're just a little bit over 95-year-old art institution that was founded by artists with the explicit interest of educating and cultivating an interest in contemporary art in this region, right? Currently, we have an artist membership of roughly 300 artists throughout predominantly New England, but across the country and even some in Europe. We've got a gallery, which a lot of you saw, which is a gallery complex of 5 galleries. We do about 20 to 25 exhibitions a year, including solo, 2-person shows, regional juried exhibits, and a student exhibit. So just after this show that's currently up, we'll have our annual student show, which is of students from the school here at Silvermine. And we have roughly about 4,000 students annually that study here at Silvermine, from painting, printmaking, sculpture, jewelry, you name it, across the board. We like to say we've got students from 4 to 104. Right. And in addition to the galleries and the school program, we also have an outreach program that brings art education to under-resourced schools here in the local area. So as you can see, education is really paramount to all of our endeavors here at Silvermine. So when we got this opportunity to partner with David and with the Cultural Alliance of Fairfield County, we were extremely excited. You know, this idea of cultivating collectors, an area that I think it's been on my mind, I know, for at least a decade since I moved here to Connecticut, is something that really is ripe for discussion. So being able to work with the Cultural Alliance to create this 3-part series was just something we had to do. And for the last year or so, we've been planning this 3-part series. The first part, which was last month on the 27th, and you can see it online on the Cultural Alliance's YouTube page. And we're, as you can see, hence why I'm speaking to the mic, we're going to be filming this one as well. So you can go back and look at what's being discussed this evening as well. We've got a great group of panelists here to talk about the landscape of collecting, everything from the collector to journalism to arts institutions, whether it be the museum or contemporary art galleries, and an artist as well. So really giving you a sense of how all of these different members of the artistic community work together in this idea of education and collecting, right? It's a very sort of symbiotic relationship, as I'm sure we're going to see tonight. But I'm going to let David Green, my partner on this event, tell you a little bit more and introduce each of our panelists. But before I turn the mic over to David, just wanted to let you know that the third part of this 3-part series is going to be what I like to call a gallery showcase, or some of you might want to refer to as an art fair, bringing together some of the top galleries from here in the state of Connecticut all together in one location. So if you haven't already signed up, which most of you have for this event, obviously, and provided the Cultural Alliance with your email, I please suggest that you do, so that you can get more information about that upcoming event that's going to be happening in the next month or so here in Connecticut. Okay, so without further ado, I want to turn the mic over to David, who is going to tell you a little bit more about this series and introduce all of our panelists. David?
So welcome everyone. I'm so pleased that you were able to make this evening. I want to thank also our panelists for giving up their time to do this, and to US Trust for supporting us, and especially to Evan Beard from US Trust to moderate the session tonight. But perhaps most of all to Smithsonian, our truly wonderful institution that, as you've heard, is very close to celebrating its centennial, and really proving to be an amazing force for artists and for school children and for the community at large. I wanted to say, mostly, just talk a little bit about how this event and this series is a great example of what we're trying to do at the Cultural Alliance. Most people probably know us for the FC Buzz website, and for how we enable the almost 550 member artists, creative businesses, and cultural organizations and institutions in the 15 towns of coastal Fairfield County, from Greenwich to Shelton, to efficiently and centrally market their events by posting them directly to our site. And, of course, through our very popular Tuesday Click, Pick, and Go eBuzz e-blast. Now, that's our most public face, but as a representative of those artists, creative businesses, and cultural organizations, we're also hard at work trying to connect the dots, networking and bringing key players together to make people realize the immense impact of what we call the creative economy and the creative infrastructure on the economic life of our county and state. But, and this is something that Jeff and I have both agreed on a while back, one of the comparatively invisible components of this infrastructure are the collectors who buy the work of our artists. We felt that New York City exerts such an immense gravitational pull that we needed to say that while New York and its international cultural hub is a fact of life we don't want to deny, we need to educate, especially our younger people, about the immense wealth of artistic production right here in our midst, and to educate them and persuade them to trust themselves and learn how to see what are good investments for themselves and for the community right here in Fairfield County. So that was the genesis of the series, and we look forward to seeing some of the results. I think those that came to our first event a month ago both had a lot of fun and learned an immense amount from listening to the discussion among 4 of our local gallerists. And I'm thrilled that 2 of those panelists are here tonight with us, so I hope they can possibly even further contribute to the discussion. 3 things briefly I wanted to highlight. There is our summary sheet from the first session we had a month ago that you can pick up, and right at the bottom of that is the link to the URL for the video of the session. So if you missed it, or if you want to see what exactly Amy Simon was saying 3/4 of the way through the panel, you can go online and see the video of the entire session. But just very quickly, one, I was really remarked on this complicated mixture of the local, the national, and the international. It was quite clear that the 4 gallerists, for a variety of reasons, chose their location. Some of it was accidental, some of it was intentional. But once here, they spent quite a bit of time getting to know the community, building relationships with the community, and that was a key part of what they were about, was the local bricks and mortar presence. But increasingly, the national sales and the international sales, especially through the internet, have become increasingly important. So there was this almost equal mixture between the local place, national and international presence. Secondly, at the heart of all of these gallerists, their business was developing relationships, both almost equally, relationships with collectors and relationships with their artists. It was almost like co-equal stables, a stable of the collectors that they wanted to develop, and the stable of the artists whose careers they wanted to develop. So that strong connection already to 2 groups of people, I thought was very, very interesting. And lastly, one of my big issues right now is the bemoaning of the fact that we have seriously lost a lot of quality writing about the arts, and that we really need to do something about refueling both the quality and the quantity of people local folks who can write in an educated fashion about what we are seeing, to have that layer of people who are there who can open our eyes for us. So I think that's somewhere on the future agenda for the Cultural Alliance, is working on building a body of good writers. Anyway, off to this panel. I think Jeff and I have assembled a great team with, from the left, collector and financier Marty Barron, writer and painter Sharon Butler, curator and writer Robin Jaffe-Frank, curator and creative director at Franklin Street Works, Terry Smith, and painter and teacher Dimitri Wright, who will discuss their relationships with collectors and their takes on aspects of educating collectors and navigating the complexities of a healthy, artistic landscape of collecting. Now, their bios are in your program, so we won't spend the time to introduce them all individually. And before we introduce Evan, I'd like to introduce our sponsor for this evening, Jeff Daniel, who is on our Cultural Alliance board, to talk a little bit about US Trust. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for that, David. And let me extend a warm welcome on behalf of myself and my US Trust colleagues who are here with us tonight. As David indicated, I wear two hats tonight. I'm a board member of the Cultural Alliance of Fairfield County, and I'm also the Market Trust Director for US Trust in the Fairfield County division. And so I have a bird's eye view of the great partnership that we've formed, the Cultural Alliance and US Trust, and just how powerful this team has become. And I think you'll all agree, certainly if you were here at the initial series and after tonight, that there's real powerful work being done, and this partnership is bearing real fruit. This is work that we at US Trust are very proud to support. It's important work. If you're here tonight, you know how important art and culture is to our county and our communities. And Angela and Cindy and David and the team work really hard every day to give a voice to arts and culture, and a voice that probably wouldn't be heard otherwise. So we're thrilled at US Trust to be a part of that. One thing that's long been established is that thriving communities and a solid art and culture base go hand in hand. I think what's perhaps less well known or less often discussed is that there is an intersection at some point between art and collecting and finance and investing. And that's probably a perfect segue into my introduction of our moderator tonight and my colleague Evan Beard. Evan is the National Art Services Executive at US Trust. He's an authority on art investing and art-related planning and finance. He leads a national team of specialists who work each day with individuals, families who collect, endowments, arts organizations, to make sure that we're delivering first-rate service and across a wide array of platforms that are often very, very important to collectors and related organizations. I could go on for probably another 20 minutes listing Evan's various accolades in the area, but he's asked me not to, and so I won't. And without further ado, let me hand it over to Evan.
Hey, thank you so much. So the title of this series, and I was not here for the first one, but is Cultivating Collectors. And collectors have taken a lot of different shapes, sizes, and philosophies over the eras. You know, if we go back to the Renaissance, sometimes people were collecting just to stay in the good graces of the Catholic Church. You know, it's either, you support the great artists or, think of the Medicis so they can lend money. If you support the great artists through patronage, you stay in the good graces and you can continue to lend at interest. Think of the 19th century. It was the courts of Europe that were collecting to show their humanity. They were building great collections in the courts, sometimes in support of great artists, but oftentimes just to show their humanity, to stay in the good graces of their people. In the 20th century, we've seen collectors do it for cultural capital and social capital, sometimes in the most crude form just because they think it will appreciate in value. Fairly recently, we've seen collectors who are building collections and then putting credit facilities against their collection to unlock capital to buy hotels or to buy more art. Last year, we saw a gentleman out of Seattle who leveraged his art collection to build enough hotels so that Seattle will be able to host a Super Bowl. We saw the American Stock Exchange building bought in Lower Manhattan entirely by an art collection, someone levering it to buy the American Stock Exchange. So art has taken a lot of forms, collecting has taken a lot of forms. I think we're in this interesting philosophical shift of collectors that, it's always been the aesthetic drive, but now there's the financial drive, there's the social drive as we've become more event-driven. And so what we want to kind of delve into today, because if you want to see a master of the universe, a really successful person completely scared to death, bring them to a contemporary art fair. The art market bewilders, it scares people, it is confusing, it's this strange ecosystem of galleries, dealers, artists, collectors, museums, critics, bloggers, and we have a great cross-section of that entire community today. So we're going to get the collector's perspective, the blogger's perspective, the museum curator's perspective, the artist's perspective, which is often the one person that's usually left out of this discussion, so I'm so happy we have two of those, and the contemporary art space perspective to understand what drives the value of art and where to begin as you start to think about putting together a serious collection. So with that, maybe I'll just open it up with our resident collector who has built quite a significant collection in his own right, and maybe you can kick things off by helping us understand what were you thinking, what considerations were you thinking about, and what drove you as you were starting to think about putting together a collection? Did it happen organically?
Well, I don't think I was thinking anything. Pretty much, for me, from a personal standpoint, Evan, is I just realized I liked looking at art. I'm not necessarily sure why I liked looking at art. And for those who collect, I think they sort of probably understand what I mean when I say that. And what I did initially, I think, is fairly normal. It's local. I looked at local artists in our area. I live up in the West Hartford area. I visited all the galleries in that area. And then just started to, create that little network, which back then, 35 plus years ago, is much more difficult than it is today. Today it's rather simple. I would call a gallery for slides, and nobody would be there, and 3 days later they'd get back to me, and then I'd get the slides in the mail 2-3 weeks later, and they weren't really great images. And now if you have interest in a piece of work wherever it is around the whole world, you just hit a couple of buttons, and within 40 seconds you've got 30 images in your hand that you can look at. So I don't know that I had any grand scheme about it. I think that if you're getting started at it and you're not at the stage where you're leveraging your collection to build public institutions, but if you're just trying to maybe enjoy looking at something and having it on your walls, and not to marginalize the concern, but maybe you're even divorced from the financial side of it, other than the fact that you have to be able to afford it. But from that point, I think you just want to look around and figure out what it is that you like. And the more looking, the better. Your local galleries, the New York galleries, wherever galleries may be, museums, social media is the greatest because every artist has a website and Instagram and Tumblr, and then you have people like Sharon who create their blogs, and they do a wonderful curatorial sort of process for you. They vet for you, and you're sort of determining, okay, this is the sort of stuff I like. And for me, it's sort of contemporary abstract art. For others, it might be turn of the century art, or it might be, seagull on the dock with the sun going down in a nice frame. And whatever it is doesn't matter. But once you figure out what it is that you're after, social media and technology, I think, provides a very efficient sort of conveyor belt to bring you to.
Did you make a determination early in the process to put a fence around a certain genre, a certain movement, a certain time period? Did you come to that organically?
That took a little while. Yeah, no, I was just sort of, as I said, sort of looking around locally, and then actually it was an artist who said to me, what you really got to do, Marty, is you got to calibrate your eye. And I really didn't understand what he meant at the time, but he said you've got to look at more things and start to get a sense by looking at it what it is that you're interested in, and again you'll know it when you see it. So I had no predetermined modus operandi.
So Terry, one of our curators, how do you calibrate the eye? You do many contemporary art exhibits. You've won accolades around this. You have an eye, obviously. This is your profession.
I have two.
You have two. At least one of them is renowned. How do you develop that? Where does it come from? What are you doing? What are you thinking in that moment when you look at a work? What's going through your mind on whether this is high art or decorative nonsense?
Okay, well, I don't know if I do that binary, but I've been looking at work for 20 years, and I'm actually working on a show that is inspired by sort of sculpture and identity politics in the 90s, because I realized I was looking at that when I was young, and that was kind of something that formed me in a way. But I actually am drawn to things that make me feel uncomfortable. I feel like, because I have looked at so much. So for some people, uncomfortable is the norm, right? They've only seen so many things, so you're like, this is uncomfortable, so is that, so is that, so is that. But when you've looked at a lot of work, you're kind of like, oh, yeah, they're doing that, they're influenced by this person, they're influenced by that person, this is, and you kind of are just like, okay, I know what this is, but when I look at something and I'm kind of like, whoa, what the heck is going on here? Either compositionally, conceptually, the connection to the social, the connection to political things, then I'm get curious. So I think the best advice I could give, I think the most important thing as a viewer or a collector or a human really is just be curious, be inquisitive. It's there's no one answer, it's not math.
You made a point that's kind of interesting, because we oftentimes hear that adage, buy what you love, buy what appeals to you. You seem to be saying not the opposite, but something a little different. You should be buying what is challenging you, what is making you think, what is maybe challenging preconceived notions that maybe makes you a little uncomfortable.
I think it's okay to be uncomfortable. Yeah. What you buy, I think I have, most of the art I have people gave me because I know so many artists, but the one thing I bought recently is a coaster, a paper coaster that the artist wrote, I wish this was Willie Nelson's tour bus with a frowny face, and then he put it on a piece of fake paneling and put it in a gold frame. I love Willie Nelson, I'm from Nashville, I love the 70s, so I love fake paneling, and I love the fact that he stuck it in a crazy gold gilded frame. It makes no sense. So that makes me happy every day I look at it, and I'm having a bad day and I'm like, yeah, I really do wish I was on Willie Nelson's tour bus, but I'm not. So that's that could be a reason enough to buy something. It's just, it makes you smile every day.
So it's not just the aesthetics, art gives you an intellectual experience. Robin, you've former curator at Yale, the Wadsworth Athenaeum, which if you haven't been to the Wadsworth, it has one of the great collections, not only in Connecticut, but I think in the whole Northeast, if not the country. When a museum is going through the acquisition process, beyond just filling gaps in the collection, what are you considering? What are you looking for? How are you evaluating? Give us the institutional perspective as we're out there buying art.
Well, I can tell you that has nothing to do with it. One of the things that's fascinating to me in regard to your question, Evan, is often when I will go into a gallery space, I will look around and say, okay, if I were purchasing right now for the Yale University Art Gallery, I would get this object. If I were purchasing something for the Wadsworth Athenaeum, I would get this object. If I was purchasing something for myself, money aside, in other words, of a museum quality piece, I would get something else. And the fact that so often 3 different objects, all of them visually compelling, would be the answer to what would I purchase, says a great deal about the decision behind building a collection for a museum. So the Wadsworth Atheneum is the oldest public art museum in the United States. It's absolutely a gem. So when you look at works for the Wadsworth Atheneum, you're thinking about a collection that has grown over an extraordinarily long period of time, and that includes works of art that tell the story of human creativity from ancient times to the present second through its Matrix Gallery program that shows emerging artists. And it has certain strengths. For example, one of the greatest Hudson River School collections, one of the greatest Surrealism collections in both American and European. So for them, I might choose one of the greatest Baroque art collections. So I'll give you an example of how you might purchase. You want to either build on an existing strength because people make pilgrimages from all over the world because they're interested in Baroque art, Surrealism, or the Hudson River School. But to purchase a work of art or to cultivate a relationship with a donor who collects in those areas, you want to make sure that you're going to, either through gift or purchase, acquire something that's of the same extraordinary, exceptional level in those areas. The other thing you might want to do is fill a gap. But you will know, for example, let's say it's the Wadsworth and they have a few wonderful Ashcan School paintings, New York City in the early 20th century that really are about urban life, but they don't have a lot. So you're going to purchase one thing. That one thing is going to have to speak to an awful number of aesthetic and thematic ideas. So they're very different choices that you're going to make. So you think about first, is the object visually compelling? Is it, if you know the artist's work, regardless of the period, is it an excellent example of their work? Is it a truly outstanding example of their work from a particular period that has great resonance? And then how does it fit into the collection? What is the justification for going after this work rather than another work? Will it be shown a lot? Will it be exhibited in the permanent collection? What kind of impact would it have if it were? Can you see it being part of a number of important exhibitions that are coming up? Or by having this here, does it take a whole another idea? And its aesthetic importance, as well as what Terry was talking about in terms of ideas, intellectual ideas, but also we look for humanities ideas that resonate across time and space and that are still important to our present moment.
So it seems to be you're collecting in the context of a collection that is meant to, tell a story, an overarching art historical story. And it sounds like, Terry, you're collecting or you're doing curated shows that are in the context of sometimes it's a social issue, an identity issue. Would both of you agree or disagree that there is an objective, important, beautiful work of art, or is all art just in the context that it's presented?
Good question. But
I mean, is anything objective ever? I don't know. I mean, no, I don't think there is such a thing as objective.
No.
No.
So a Da Vinci is only beautiful in the context of it, presented in the arc of the Italian Renaissance. It on its own is not an objectively beautiful, important.
Well, it might be
magnificent work of art.
objectively beautiful to people now who look at art. You know what I mean? Like but it may not be objectively beautiful in like 300 years, or it may not be objective. You know what I mean? Like everything's connected to like the social and our time and how we've been taught. Right? Like we've all been taught since we were kids that is good art. So how can you ever be objective about
So
that.
if that's the case, I want to quickly go to the critic here. I mean,
'Cause
you're...
I don't entirely agree with Terry. I just want to say that.
My sense is you don't, and I'm glad we have disagreement.
I don't either,
Otherwise, we'd all be
Terry.
bored. But
We're friends, though.
no, it's good.
Can I
So-
can I jump in here?
Please.
I think that, one of the things that we say as artists, and as painters particularly, is that painting is a lifelong process. And, you begin when you're maybe in high school, maybe you're in college, and you paint or make art for your entire life. And within that span of time, you go through different periods, and so I think that it's not just about where your work falls in, or where an artist's work falls within the span of cultural activity, but actually within that particular artist's span of production.
Yeah.
And so I think that you could say, that some work in an artist production is more important than other work. And it doesn't have to do with beauty. It has to do with, the moves that an artist makes, the pieces they make that move their practice forward. Like some are more important than others. Some are...
How do you measure importance?
Well, I was just going to say, sometimes you'll go to a show and you'll see 12 to 20, I'm going to say paintings because my area is painting. You'll see 20 paintings that are all fairly similar. And they've been made for this particular show, and they're all about the same idea, right? So those are probably all of equal importance within the artist's work, but there's always going to be one that started, or one or two or 5 or 10 that were the transitional pieces that started that period, and then it becomes something that the artist does, and they make more work. And then they go into a transitional period again. And so, when I say that making art is a lifelong process, for the collector, what that means is being familiar with the artist, the arc of the artist's career. And whether it's a new artist whom you're just discovering at, in some gallery in Bushwick or in Hartford or the Franklin Street works, you kind of need, the beauty is if you buy from someone who's young, you can follow their career. And you maybe want to try to select pieces from each of their periods that they go through, and how wonderful to watch them as they develop. If, on the other hand, you're buying from someone who's, an established artist, well, then, like Marty says, it's just wonderful that you can go on the internet and do all kinds of research to find out where this particular show that they're having fits in. How does it follow the previous work that they did?
And we're definitely going to get to the resources and how to research, but you make, I think, a really important point about influence. A recent director of the Tate said there's kind of 4 levels in the development of an artist's market. The first is that artist starts to influence other artists. And the second is galleries catch on because they're seeing other artists starting to be influenced by the style, the medium of that artist. And then once the gallery or dealer catches wind, then there's critical interest in the art critics, and there's people that start to write. And then finally, it's accepted into the museum and curatorial class. So if it all starts with the artist, and that's the most important starting point, the influence you have on other artists, I'd be interested, Dimitri, to get your perspective on when you are making works of art. Are you trying to influence the culture? Are you trying to influence other artists? Are you cognizant of the influence that other artists are having on you? And then I'll have a follow-up about the market, which I'm curious about.
All the above. I was told when I was a young artist, can you hear? That poor people sent their children to study applied art, and wealthy people sent their children to study fine art. I had both. I graduated first in my class, and my first paying job was painting barbershop signs. But I also won the Max Beckman International Scholarship. And at that point, museums were buying my work, and I was winning awards. And then I got on the track of Cooper Union, and still selling to museums. So cultivating collectors for me is based upon excellence, doing what your craft holds, and being a good steward of it. It's one thing for you to produce the work, it's something else for you to care for it properly so that it's not destroyed. I have the Naugatuck Museum that's going to be giving me a one-man show in September, and it's going to be called An Artist for All Seasons. So there you'll see an arc of my career. We haven't talked about details yet, but I imagine we'll have some work from Arts High School all the way up to where I'm at now. It's interesting when a lot of people said there is a change and a shift. I think when artists are in art school, you're thinking about passing. And you're thinking about graduating. And then you're thinking about finding galleries and so on and so forth. But if you're practical, you will do whatever applied art work that's necessary in order to move forward. I was also told that in order for an artist to be pure, you would not do anything to prostitute your art form. So if you could not make it selling your work, you should be a cab driver or work in a museum or something like that. So you're surrounded by it, but you remain pure. But if you illustrate books, if you teach, you sold out. You know, so all these things are flying around and doing my artistic development.
As you're making works of art, are you affected by what's going on in the market? I mean,
all the time.
Negatively, positively?
The first art school was academy-level artwork, and here I graduated first in my class, so I'm strict. But it came a certain point where I went to Manhattan to see the de Kooning show. It turned the art department upside down. So I think picking up influences like Francis Bacon as I went forward, which helped me with the Beckman Scholarship, caused a lot of changes in my art form.
I'd be interested to hear from each of our panelists. Do you feel that the market, when I say the market, price levels of works of art by certain artists, either in the primary market or the secondary market at auction, is a reasonable signal of greatness or importance or influence?
No.
No? Can you expand on that just a little bit?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that in the primary market, well, I think we're all sort of seduced by the story of the person who bought whatever, you know, and sold it for a lot more.
Yes.
And I think that happens, and I think there's just as many pieces that go at auction that 12 and 15 years ago were on the gallery walls and sold for $20,000 and $25,000, and at auction they sell for $1,000 and $1,500. I think there's probably more of that going on. But everybody approaches it their own way, and I think what Dimitri said really held, and I think what Sharon said hit a chord with me, is that I don't think somebody's making a painting and they're thinking, boy, this thing's worth $1,200 now, and it's going to be worth $5,000. I think it's just organic, it's intuitive. I can't explain in an articulate sense why I spend most of my time when I'm on the phone on hold looking at everybody's blogs. And I'm not so sure artists that are not necessarily true, but they're just in there every day, you know. And as much as the gallery scene exists, and as much as the museum scene exists, and more power to it, I love both of them, I think it's also safe to say that we could fill this space here and you could create a great collection of super high quality work that most people would agree on for artists that have no gallery representation and very little commercial success.
So for our budding collectors here, is the market a reasonable barometer for them? Or should they, yes?
We play this game in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. When something gets a record price at auction, we say, well, how would you spend that money? And you know, when something sells for, I don't know, $10 million, say, and you could fund this nonprofit space and that nonprofit space, and you could buy a whole show of work by such and such an artist who is so fantastic. You know, I mean, we just look at those prices and we just think it's out of nowhere, especially for the younger artists, and that money could be so much, you know, think of the collector, the amazing collector who might take $10 million and really contribute to growing the art community. That person would be really terrific.
Is it a negative that works by the pop artists or the abstract expressionists or even the great old masters? Is it a negative thing that they've popped into the tens of millions of dollars? What's the negative effect on the ecosystem?
Well, I think it's negative for the younger artists who get mixed up in the art market, whose work gets bought for, like Marty's saying, for $25,000 in a gallery and then ends up at auction the next year for $100,000, and then the next year they can't sell it for $15,000, and then basically what are they supposed to do? Their market is ruined. They go, and often people like, you'll see Julian Schnabel, he went and started making films.
Right. And we've seen that more recently with some of the young abstract artists, the zombie formalists, as some people refer to them. They've overheated and then collapsed in a big way.
And it's completely a bubble. It has nothing to do with the quality of the work.
Interesting. A barometer?
And can I just say one more thing?
Please.
I do think that the collectors now, they game the system. The ones who are involved with that, buying at that level in the in the auctions, like Simchowitz, is that his name?
Yeah.
They game the system where they'll buy out an artist show, and then they'll place it in put it on Instagram, create some sort of buzz about it, raise the prices, tell all their friends to buy it, and then, God forbid, you shouldn't get the word that we're selling that this week, because you'll be stuck holding it.
She refers to a gentleman in LA named Stefan Simchowitz, who one of his strategies is to make a lot of noise, and he's very savvy when it comes to PR, a lot of noise about an up-and-coming artist or an artist that is being rediscovered, plaster it all over Instagram, and then make sure that a few of these are popping up at auction and then defend it at auction. Another strategy we see is a gallerist that may represent a young or emerging artist, and they may have sold a work that is coming to auction, and they need to defend that work at auction so they can maintain the prices in the gallery. The third area that we see, and you could say this is dishonest or what have you, is collectors that go very deep in one artist and who may have built up a big collection and are using that collection to unlock capital from that collection by putting a credit facility. So that collection is essentially an internal source of capital for them. What we see is they defend that artist at auction because if that artist collapsed at auction, suddenly their capital base would collapse as well in their borrowing capacity. So some of these games are played. Please. So, a defended auction, you and I, you're a gallerist, you represent the woman in the yellow shirt. You sold one of her works to Marty here, and Marty decided, despite you telling him, I don't want you to sell it at public auction, he needs the money, he got overextended, and he consigns it to Phillips, and suddenly it's going to be in the day sale. You say that if that work fails to sell, that's going to be a signal to the market that the artist I'm representing, one, is not as collectible as I would like people to believe, and the price points I have in my gallery, now I have a public auction data point that is well below that people will research, and it'll be impossible for me to sell. So you and perhaps your gallery assistant are on the phone bidding that work up to make sure you can defend the prices in your gallery. That happens, and we can get into whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. But the market, is it a barometer? Maybe I just, through that vignette there says it's not necessarily a barometer, but is it a general barometer for collectors to look at, prices gained at auction or in the private market, when they're looking to buy a work of art? Is it a barometer of greatness or influence?
I don't know if I can answer that question. I think what I can answer is more appropriately based on my background is the effect that it has on museum collecting. So, well, first I want to say that I am proud to say that every exhibition that I have worked on or supervised or encouraged at the two institutions that I have had the pleasure of working at and the privilege of working at, when we put together an exhibition, like the one I'm working on right now at the New York Historical Society called World War I Beyond the Trenches, it includes very well-known artists like these are all American artists, obviously from the early 20th century, like George Bellows, John Singer Sargent, George O'Keeffe. I can go on and on.
This will all be in this upcoming show you're curating?
Yes.
Wow.
It opens May 26th at the New York Historical Society. Got that in there. Great institution. But it also includes, all right, how many people have ever heard of Claggett Wilson? Nobody. He was a U.S. Marine, enlisted in the Marine Corps, and he won all kinds of medals, the French Croix de Guerre, numerous medals for his bravery. He was wounded twice, and then he served in the U.S. Army of Occupation, and during that time period, part of, as a form of, I think, psychological and spiritual therapy, he did watercolors that are not so much what he saw during the war, but how the war made him, how it feels, how it smells, what the experience was. And his works are, in many respects, the surprise and the star of the show. And I can say that about every exhibition I've worked on. And so, and they hold up. In other words, when you put them next to these other artists, and yet they're also completely different from anything else you've ever seen. Extraordinary. So there are new artists always to be discovered, whether they're in the past or they're in the present. I have no idea if one of his works came up at auction, what it would possibly go for. I can tell you that, of course, the fact that they are being shown at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and at the New York Historical Society, that people are going to go and look and see if they have anything by him, and if they do, it will affect the art market and it will go up in price. But it won't be the same as a John Singer Sargent. I can also tell you that if one of the things you should do when you go to a museum is look on those tombstones, look at the bottom line. The bottom line is called the credit line. And you will see, because we're talking about relationships to collectors, it will say gift of, or it will have the fund, the money that museums use to buy works of art has nothing to do with the money that's for operations, for keeping the lights on. It's separate, and that is money that has been given by collectors, by donors, by trustees for that fund, or the gifts are relationships you have with donors who are interested in the institution. I would venture to say that everybody who becomes a collector, maybe you're using it for capital, fine, you can do what you want, it's your property. But my view about owning a work of art is that you're a caretaker. And the most important thing you can do for Dimitri's work, or the works that you're showing, or Claggett Wilson's work, or John Singer Sargent's, is get it out to the public where it's accessible in a public institution and can be seen and taught from and shared for generations to come.
So Terry, it sounds like the curator does play an important role in rediscovering and solidifying an artist's place in art history, which indisputably has an effect on the market for that artist. But do you see your role as that in any way? I mean, are you an influence on the market for the artist's work that you're showing? And do you feel that the market is a barometer of, as we said, influence and greatness?
I feel like because we're an alternative art space with museum quality exhibitions, which is kind of a nice combo, so we take more chances than museums are usually allowed to take. Not that museums don't take, I mean, I worked at a museum for 13 years, so not anti-museum at all. But as an alternative art space, there's more innovation. And there's a little more risk-taking. So we show people who maybe don't have a reputation yet. So I think as far as the market, I don't think about the market very much. I mean, I know it's there. There's this great book by Gregory Cholette, by the way, called Dark Matter that everyone should read if you're curious about. It's called Dark Matter, and it's by Gregory Cholette. It talks a lot about like intersections of different art world things. What I see as being beneficial for artists and their careers and their eventual market is we pay artists an honorarium to create new works. So we give them an opportunity and a reason to make something new and stretch their practice. We get reviews for our shows. It's really important to me because it's important to have that kind of discourse public. Like when people are researching artists in 100 years, 50 years, they look at books in libraries and they find reviews of that artist's work. So we are like some of the earliest reviews of these artists' work. So I think that we kind of sustain artists before people know who they are, by having faith in them and by giving them resources that require us to have donors.
So Dimitri, from the artist perspective, as you're looking, I mean, you may be a collector yourself, but for collectors that are, looking at an artist, what should they be trying to understand? Right?
Authenticity, excellence, emotional sincerity towards the craft. These things are all very important. But as I said before, an artist that's had a diversified career, you do what's necessary in order to survive.
It's a lonely career, isn't it?
It's very, very lonely. For instance, I've taught art therapy in the prison program for 3 years. And so I put my wife through medical school that way. Well, I'm glad I took the time off from painting so that could happen. I remember I lived in Westbeth. Some of you have probably heard of it, in Manhattan. And there you can see all the experiments taking place. The people that have forsaken everything for their art, which is one thing I was told by one mentor, forsake all for your art. In other words, you can trash your wife, your kids, what have you, you just do what's necessary because your art comes first, everything else is last. I've seen those experiments run, and I've seen those people that decided, I'm going to have a family, I'm going to be a father, and I'm going to do what's necessary in order to move my career forward as an artist, but yet take care of my family.
So let's move on to the next segment. So this first segment is really understanding, what drives this market, where should we be looking, what are some of the considerations as you start to collect. What I pulled from it, influence matters, the authenticity of the artists. It's interesting to hear all your perspectives, the autobiographical nature of collecting, the contextual aspect of it. How about if we talk just purely aesthetics? The trends that we're seeing in the space. I'm going to just go right down the line. What's an interesting aesthetic trend that you're seeing in the art market of today that maybe is a new development for folks to take a look at?
Well, as a teacher, I have an interesting sounding board. I can see what my students are doing. I teach children, teens, and adults, beginner, intermediate, advanced, professional level. I've even been a ghost painter. And right now, a lot of people seem to be very concerned about abstract. But they're concerned about the encroachment of furniture art being taken as seriously as fine art, and not knowing the difference, or the gallery knowing the difference.
Terry?
So wait, you mean, are you saying like the decorative aspect of it,
Yes.
being used for decoration?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wait, what was the question again?
Sorry.
An aesthetic trend that is interesting to you, given your perch on the top of a contemporary art space.
I mean, I tend to be most interested in things you can't buy, like performance and, and you can buy like video art. Like I'm interested in like digital art and how like Electronic Arts Intermix, which is an amazing place. They set rental fees for things and purchase fees for things, because for a long time video art didn't really have a market, and then when it did, people didn't know what to do with it because you can make 1 million of them, right? So it's like additioned. So yeah, I told y'all I like shouldn't be on this panel. I really don't think about the art market other than how to resist it and dismantle it.
Now you occupy a very conceptual space. Given conceptual art, there's a conceptual artist from Paris, Yves Klein, and no one thought that his happenings back in the 60s would ever have a market. But just last year, we saw a certificate that said this happening happened in Montmartre, Paris on this date in 1965. The owner of this has authenticity that this happened, and it sold for $380,000 at auction. So now even happenings have a market.
I think that's one of the most interesting things about the art market is artists' efforts to resist it and make work that can never be part of it, and it's still run. Like you see Fluxus scorecards of like sweep the trash to the other side of the room, and it's like a Yoko Ono or Alison Knowles or some sort of Fluxus artist just typed card, and it's in a frame, and it's like at auction.
The market always gets the last word. How about an interesting aesthetic trend that you're seeing?
Me? Well, one of the things I'm most fascinated by actually is the degree of pluralism in the art market. That, I mean, just listening to both of you right now, I think attest to that. And I haven't made it to the Whitney Biennial yet, I'm embarrassed to say for personal reasons, but I will get there. But regardless, I think that everything is possible. I have to take issue with your saying that museums don't take risks.
No, because they're unable, like larger museums are unable to take as many risks as a small alternative art space because they're beholden to like a broader audience. That's why I said like I have nothing against museums. I was at a museum taking risks.
I don't agree. Okay. I don't agree. First of all, for example, the Matrix program at the Wadsworth Atheneum is the oldest example of a program dedicated to showing emerging contemporary artists who have never had a solo museum exhibition. And that's what they did, and their track record is unbelievable.
Great feminist shows.
Great feminist shows. Great everything shows. The first one definitely wasn't a feminist, but at the time he was not at all well known. Ever hear of Ellsworth Kelly?
Yeah.
That was their first one. So it's incredible, and those are risks, and people do not come in to see them. Because they're always like who, and what we do is we build it around a party, and we do all kinds of other things. But and they're usually supported by things like the National Endowment for the Arts.
But what's avant-garde now? I mean, what is dangerous and risky and leading, and what makes people uncomfortable? You guys are all saying everything's possible in this art world.
Everything is possible. It becomes hard to rebel, and I don't think you should rebel just to rebel. I think that what's important, and this is, where I agree with all of you, each object has to be judged on its own terms. It has to, for an object, whether you're putting it in your home, or you're putting it in an exhibition in an alternative gallery space, or the Silvermine Arts Center, or buying it for a permanent collection, it has to be visually compelling. It has to have the power to give the person encountering it a transformative experience. It has to be something to be really great that changes the way you see and experience the world. And that can be anything. It can be an immersive experience, it can be performance art, it can be a painting on the wall, it can be something that interacts with the wall and the ceiling and the floor. It can be a hybrid where you can't easily say, this is sculpture, this is performance, this is a painting, this is a chair. In other words, it breaks down boundaries. That doesn't matter. Or it can simply be a painting using mediums that have always been done. But it needs to be, as I said, visually compelling, first of all. And secondly, hopefully, whether indirectly or directly, connects with some thematic idea, whether it's nature, the artist in nature, or it's conflict and resistance, or it's systems of belief and spirituality in some way, or any of these things. It has to, in some way, have the power to move you.
So Sharon, is there an ism of this current era? Is there something we'll look back and say this is the aesthetic movement, or are we just in this postmodern kind of everything goes?
No, I think one of the things that artists talk about rather than the market is there's a conversation about the type of work that we're producing. And one of the things that I see a lot, Well, first of all, I would just, most broadly, I would say figurative work is very important right now.
It's making a big comeback, isn't it?
Yes. After a long...
Actually, it never went away.
After a long period of interest in abstraction, I think a lot of younger artists are sort of leaning towards a more figurative approach. And and that's not just in painting, I think one of the things that I'm seeing is an interest in the films of Stanley Kubrick and the idea of the post-human and sci-fi are all things that young artists are thinking about, I mean, at least what I've seen in people's studios. And then the other thing I would say, there are two more things I would say. One of them is an interest in digital consciousness, how, and it may be intentional, and it may just be that our digital consciousness, the digital life seeps into whatever we do. But I think that there's an interest not just in using, online media to do research, to find out about other artists and so forth in a zombie formalist kind of way, nor is it just using things like Photoshop to create studies and, create some sort of digital image from which we make paintings, but more creating art, and it could be really anything, whether it's performance or video or painting, sculpture, that has to do with how we feel, how being so hooked into digital life makes us feel. And then the final thing I would say is that I think you can't have a talk in 2017 without talking about politics and about talking about this huge, and I apologize if I offend anybody who, is a Trump voter, but I think that the election has really put this huge depression and anxiety over the whole creative community. And you can't help but see that in the work that's being produced, in the shows that are being curated, and the work that's being selected for those shows, and just in artist studios.
That's interesting. Arthur Danto, a philosopher from Columbia, said we reached the end of art, and he came to that conclusion when he saw Warhol's Brillo box, because he said everything's possible now. I mean, history's over. And what I'm hearing now is that everything is possible to some degree. My last question, you're the collector. What are you seeing aesthetic trends, or are you still occupying the fence that you created for yourself, or are you kind of roaming the fields where we can do anything?
I think I'm in over my head. I find art for me personally an escape from the menacing tentacles of today's world and capitalism and politics, and I know that they are baked into the process.
Sure.
But when I'm browsing and looking, I'm just sort of doing it from a very emotional state and not really at all thinking about I don't even know what the market is. I mean, I know there's galleries and I see what all the galleries are showing, but I'm almost a little disdainful of that whole process of manipulation and being told what I should like or shouldn't like. I prefer the whole art world a little more at the starting level. I love going out to Bushwick. I like all the open studios processes that you have around. Yale has a good one, Gowanus, Bushwick, they're all, and you just sort of get a true feel of the work and the person making it and the intimacy, and that's like the little niche of where I can just have my peace and quiet.
I appreciate it, Marty. I want to thank all our panelists. We're going to have some Q&A. I think, one thing, we may not have illuminated anything. We may have complicated things for you. But one thing that's inescapable, you get people together to talk about art, the market, these issues. You can't escape the philosophical aspects of it. It very quickly goes into this kind of very deep, dark, interesting area. And sometimes that's illuminating for some folks. Sometimes it always raises more questions than answers. So sometimes these panels are risky because we just open more doors, and that's the magnificent thing about the art market. We bring a curator, an artist, a collector, a museum executive together. We talk about, what it takes to understand, and you can understand why, a new collector coming into this space is sometimes scared to death. So with that, I thank you all of our panelists. A really interesting discussion. I really enjoyed it. And if there are any questions, let's open it up for some questions. In the back.
Are you concerned about what's going on with the national endowment?
Ah, perfect question. Let's go. So I'm gonna the NEA, and if it disappears, does it matter? And we're gonna go down the line.
Oh yeah, I'm terrified. Sort of on the heels of what Sharon mentioned, and it would just be catastrophic if it disappears.
Please.
Yeah, I think it would be hard for communities, small communities across the country, if there were no NEA. And I hate to think about what it would mean for the next generation of artists. Will we even have a next generation of artists if there aren't any small regional museums and so forth? But I do think that artists are very creative, and I think that the community spirit that has created places like Franklin Street Works.
Wait, come on. The next generation, the NEA, which has been around since the 60s, we're talking about 2,000 years of Western civilization. Art has flourished, and if this tiny little organization disappears, we may not have a next generation of artists?
Well, I think it makes a difference, the small art programs in different communities. I'm not talking about the Metropolitan Opera or something.
Sure.
These larger things. I'm just talking about all the smaller things that the NEA funds that might disappear.
Is this catastrophic, Robin?
Yes. Yes, the NEA, the NEH, many other foundations and grant organizations are essential for individual artists. They're essential for art centers like the one that we're sitting in right now. And they are absolutely critical for museum exhibitions and permanent collection installations. At both institutions I've worked at and in the projects I'm working on right now, they have been absolutely vital. For example, I have an exhibition right now called Coney Island Visions of an American Dreamland that was funded by NEA, NEH money, Lehman, Roberts, go on and on, all of these different groups. No, it was entirely, it's a huge show of over 140 objects that traveled to major museums that was funded entirely by foundations that deals with that brings together great works of art by well-known and not well-known artists from the Civil War era to contemporary moment. It would not have been possible without that funding. Also, when you get that funding, it is like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. That then gets individuals, corporations, and others to give more money. And I also work on a foundation that's about that. And very often, it's the most innovative stuff, the stuff that a corporation wouldn't fund, that you absolutely need that money to have innovative, exciting, and challenging and difficult shows.
Terry, is it catastrophic?
It's certainly depressing, and I think it's depressing for me. Just on a logistical level, it's my understanding that Connecticut actually gets some of the state grant money that's given out in Connecticut is received from the NEA. So, is that true, Dave? Yes. So that will affect my space, potentially.
Dimitri?
Wait, I'm not done.
Oh, sorry.
But the thing, on a deeper level, I feel like it's an attack on, the attack on the arts is an attack on creativity and critical thinking, and those are things that benefit certain people in power, and I think that it's tactical in a way that is disheartening and deflating and is something that bothers me very much.
Dimitri?
Well, I'm very much vexed by the whole thing. I remember the NEA in the past putting on rather controversial exhibitions, which really, pissed a lot of people off.
Literally.
So if you're Catholic, which I am, I have issues with that. And I think if the decision makers were more balanced, have conservatives and leftists, rightists, what have you, but all together making a decision, not just one group making the decision and poking their finger in people's eyes. I can't begin to tell you how many relatives would come to me and says, "You're in the arts, why are these people doing this to us? Why are they treating us like this?"
That's interesting. So that's a bit of a departure from the rest of the panel.
Yeah, well, look, I'm the person, I did posters for the Black Panthers, so I'm down for the struggle as much as anyone else, but sometimes the collateral damage that certain decisions will make are bad.
No, it's an interesting perspective. Look, the NEA, it's a $186 million annual outlay from the federal budget. It's quite small, but it does a lot of important work. Part of it, the federal indemnity insurance that allows major museum shows to have the insurance capacity to bring over great works of art from Europe, etc. With that said, there's a compelling case on both sides here. The NEA does great work. We're huge supporters of the arts. But there's a very interesting argument to be made that if $186 million disappears from the national arts budget, 186 spread over all 50 states and every single congressional district, will that incite more private donations for funding? Will it?
No.
No? No?
No. And also not for some of the things that are more, and by difficult or challenging topics, I don't mean what you're pissed about.
But that's an important point.
Yeah.
If the NEA is going to fund Piss Christ, why should a taxpayer be compelled to have their money go towards that?
Well, I don't want to fund the military budget being doubled either, but I have to.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if you read the article that was just recently in the New York Times about, what was it, South Dakota, in other words, a particular area. The Coney Island show that I'm talking about, that the NEH is funding now, that is traveling across the Midwest, it is going to places like, I think I have to go to some town in Michigan that I've never heard of. This is, the NEH is bringing art that people in these areas would never see without the NEH's funding. And these are people who are who for the most part cannot afford or never have traveled to New York City to go to the Met. And in addition to that, they're doing it because in their case they care about humanities issues, and the main thing that show happens to be about, which is very appropriate, Sharon, for the particular time period we're living in, is about the mixing of people of different races, classes, and ethnic backgrounds in a social space, Coney Island, that transcends boundaries. So it's about that.
My last devil's advocacy, the argument is sometimes made that look to Europe, which nationalized their entire philanthropic museum art space and crowded out to almost an entire degree private support and philanthropic dollars to the arts. Is there a case to be made by completely privatizing support for the arts in this country, given the size of private donations to the arts and compelling high net worth individuals to do it, especially $186 million? Anybody?
I have a really strong opinion on
Please.
this. I think that's a huge mistake. By denying funds to these institutions, they will be chumming for collectors big dollars on the boards because they have to survive. What happens? You have collectors that don't hold a candle in terms of knowledge with these curators. And they will be dictating the direction of the cultural institutions for private gain. Anyone who's read, good old modern knows how it started, good or bad. It was to promote their own collections. And there will be personal gain because you get your work, artists you champion in these institutions, it increases in value. And this is what's wrong with the art market, and I'm an art dealer, has really, really muddied the waters to a degree.
But 3.5 billion in arts donations a year, right?
I could disagree more. This is what brings artists here. They're going to stop coming. Why would they want? They can't get visas.
But that's a separate NEA question. Please.
Exactly.
All right. I completely support the NEA. I can't do a session where we all agree with one another and group things. So no, I think the NEA is a great organization. They also provide, as you said, the good seal of approval to some of these organizations that allow them to go raise other funds. But let's not be too dire here. If the NEA goes away, which it will not, they have they're very strong bipartisan support.
Yes.
And what you need is more Republican support for the arts, and that'll keep the NEA in place for a long time. Another question.
To a certain degree. Actually, there are some organizations that have been planning for this for a while. Fairfield County Community Foundation has started a separate foundation for the arts. And then the Arts Council just recently started a foundation for the arts. And the point is that there's a tremendous amount of private ability, tremendous donations.
Elon Musk said if the NEA goes away tomorrow, I'll double that 186 million and make it 400 million overnight. So it's not going to happen, but it won't be dire.
Yeah, do it now. We still need it.
Do it now. Let's have one more.
Please, another question?
So I just want to add to the conversation to what the gentleman in the front said. I think most damaging is what it does to our perception in terms of building and investing in cultural equity.
That makes sense, yeah.
Although the money is only 180 million, it's a lot of money for us. But when you do a comparison analysis to other nations that are much more than us and investing a lot more, it goes on to say it's not really a lot of money anyways. I think it's more symbolism than anything else. I think artists will survive. Artists are incredibly good at being broke. Broke is good. Broke is not a bad thing in the best country in the world. I think we still have a great country. Very difficult. I mean, things are very difficult. I think what this guy is doing, it's really devastating for all of us. But we will survive. I mean, that is what artists are able to do. And I think artists will become more creative. I think nonprofits that so highly depend on such funds are making a mistake, and they're going to learn it with this. They should always diversify. That's business 101. And I think at the end of the day, we will survive. I think also more people will donate money. $5, $10, $20, $50. I think people in America, especially corporations, I mean, they're doing a lot of things to do more. They're going to start investing now into the arts, into these nonprofits, because the government is no longer doing it.
The message of symbolism is so important, and I think you're right. That one of the biggest reasons to defend the NEA is, the message it sends to our children, everyone else. One more question, and then we're going to go.
I do have something that, the art world is very criticized, is already not being open to the broader audience, right? That it's fairly closed off, white, wealthy. So there is concern with NEA funding going away from that. But I'm curious to know how the panel feels about that and how you were addressing it.
White and wealthy, the diversity of the market, and maybe as an example here, being slightly too esoteric sometimes.
Yeah, look at her.
Take it away, Sharon.
Well, I think that artists aren't wealthy, and that's really my area. So I think there's this split, between the people who buy art and the people who go to the auctions and the people who make it. And, we spend a lot of money. We give real estate developers a lot of money. We pay our last dollar for that shitty space that next year we're not going to be able to afford because we're helping to gentrify that neighborhood. So there's that. So I don't associate artists necessarily with being wealthy, but the diversity. I think that we are becoming more diverse, and I think that if anybody followed the Whitney Biennial controversy about the Dana Schutz painting of Emmett Till, is a really good indication that there are a lot of voices out there who are making themselves known who are not white, and I think that's a great thing. And I'm certainly more aware of it. For the most part, my blog, Two Coats of Paint, has been one of the main things I try to do is to write about women's work, because women are often neglected and they don't make it into the historical record. And I'm trying to expand that conversation to include more people of color
and when else solutions to diversify the art world.
Well, I can tell you that in museums, there's a lot going on with that regard. So if you look at the Yale University Art Gallery is free and open to everyone, and there is very active teaching that goes on starting in the 3rd grade with little kids from urban and suburban communities, and especially from New Haven itself. And the same is absolutely true at the Wadsworth Atheneum, which is a public museum, which is also, by the way, free to people from the city of Hartford, which is a predominantly African-American city, but also just very diverse in general. And the most important thing is getting kids in young. And if you look also here at the Silvermine Arts Center, for example, there's a very active Art Partners program in which teaching goes out to communities that are underserved in Stamford and in Norwalk. So everywhere this is being done, I can tell you that I myself grew up in an immigrant family, did not go to museums as a child, did not know that jobs like the ones and people like the people I'm sitting with on this panel who are so wonderful existed. And there are many people like me in the museum world who see it as their mission to make sure that young people grow up knowing that they can grow up to be artists, that they can grow up to be creative, that they can grow up to find jobs in museums, in art centers, and most importantly, that creativity is not something that belongs to any one group of people, but belongs to everyone.
Dimitri, a point?
Get
Bring
him
us home here?
young. Get him young.
I think I have too much to say on the subject, and it's not enough time. First, I would say that I'm not a racist. Half my family is white, and we have to learn how to thrive. I teach at the Historical Society for the town of Greenwich, and also Weir Farm National Historic Site. And one of the goals is underserved populations. And for those individuals, you got to go out, and generally they don't have the school bus to even get there or anything. So it's a big front outlay. And then from just over 40 years of professional experience, when they go to museums and things like that for the first time, it's unbelievable. So yes, there are a lot of good things that are happening, but there's a lot of bad things which are happening. And I know established artists, Afro-Americans, which are off the chart, and they're not being recognized. It's interesting, coming up, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. Now I live in Greenwich, so I'm not a starving artist. But I find it interesting on how I get calls for exhibition during Black History Month. My mentor, Ruben Tam, which was one of the top 10 artists at the time, he taught the Beckman Scholarship, he said he was still considered an exotic artist. My other mentor, Donald Brown, was considered a black artist. So when you put these things front, that means you can show here and not here. You're in this class or that class. So I'm tired of it, but I've managed to navigate these waters, but not everyone can do it. And you could see by the audience here, so.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we really appreciate all you coming out, the Silvermine Arts Center. You know, I think what I took from this, look at artistic influence, buy what makes you uncomfortable, support your local arts institutions, support local artists, and, you know, it's a complex, shark-infested waters, this art market. So hope you had fun, and you have about, I guess, another half hour. Did you need a ride?